Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today, my guest is Jennifer Vandekreeke. Jennifer has held various senior roles, first in agency, then director, executive GM, and VP of marketing roles for brands like Club Med, the NRMA, and then established the Carnival Cruise Line business in the Australasian market. She's now CEO at URBNSURF. If you haven't heard of URBNSURF, it's a world-first surf destination that houses state-of-the-art wave technology for consistent, high-quality waves in a controlled environment day and night. It's helping more people surf more and better. And I've heard the food is pretty good too, so shout out to our friends over at Applejack's. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me a bit about your career journey and some highlights along the way.
Wow. Let's see. In full disclosure, I did my master's thesis on building third world countries or developing countries through tourism. And I have been absolutely fascinated with travel and leisure ever since. And I've been really lucky because I have been able to work with some of the most amazing brands on the planet, from Club Med and Carnival, even like the Biltmore Hotel, and then some airlines when I lived in South America. So it's been a trip from advertising to marketing to general management up into executive leadership, and it's been a lot of fun.
What do you think drew you to tourism in the early days? What is it about it that resonates with you?
I think more than anything, experiences to me are more valuable than possessions. And when I just think about my life and when I grew up, the most valuable things that I gained were the holidays that I spent with my family. And so it was really important to me and part of my values to ensure that everybody gets out and makes the most out of life. And to me, making the most out of life is getting outside, doing active things, exploring the world. That's what really makes life worth living.
From what I know about you, you're a fairly ambitious person, and that's shown through all of the sort of roles that you've held over the years. Where does that ambition come from for you? Was that learnt or is that just innate?
Oh, wow. So I guess both, right? I guess it's nature and nurture. My mom loves to tell the story of how I rubbed my nose raw in the hospital when I was born, 2 weeks early, of course, just because I kept on moving my head around. I just wanted to go do things. And then one of my favorite stories is when I must have been, I don't know, I was probably 5 or 6, and I was on a plane down to Florida to go visit my grandparents. And I heard the flight attendants chatting about how they got to have free flights. And there was that and the fact that they wore really cool uniforms. So I proudly turned to my dad and I was like, so Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to be a stewardess. Because that's what they were called back then. And my dad, he looked right at me and he's like, no, you won't. You'll be a pilot.
And how did you respond, or what was your take on that?
So first of all, I was like, okay. And second of all, I love that my father saw something that didn't exist yet and was absolutely sure that I could do it. There wasn't a woman in the cockpit until like 1982.
Wow.
But there weren't women who were captains on major airlines until the 90s. But he was convinced that his little 6-year-old girl could be something that didn't even exist yet and that there was nothing in my way. It's funny when I talk to particularly other successful women in business, all of them talk about the role that their fathers had in just making them believe they could do anything. And so I didn't end up being a pilot, but I did end up being a CEO, and there weren't a lot of those around when I was a little girl either.
Amazing. And it sounds like you've sort of, I guess from a nurture nature perspective, that was the early nurturing, but obviously you were just born with this sort of desire to do big things and do great things. What specifically about the marketing career trajectory drew you in, and what's kept you?
I think that the beautiful thing about marketing is, first of all, there is no right answer. It's not like accounting or finance where there is an appropriate way to categorize something. There's as a matter of fact, breaking the rules is one of the most fun things that you can do, and sometimes one of the most successful things that you can do. So I love the blend of kind of this art and the creativity and actual science, particularly today with everything that we can do around optimization and around really behavioral economics and understanding how people think and how people react based on messages they're given. So the combination of the two I find is really fascinating, and I never get bored talking about marketing.
As you've progressed through different sort of levels of marketing from director to executive GM and VP roles, has your relationship to the components or elements of the marketing mix changed?
That's an interesting question. I think that, I started obviously on the agency side back in the day when you used to do like $500,000, $1 million ads and then run them for a year. They were the days, can I just say? It's much more complicated now. And I think that as I progressed and grew in my career, right, I started in advertising, then I moved up into, general marketing, then I moved up into management. And as you move through, you become a lot less myopic, because I have to say, when I was just running advertising, I thought it was the center of the world and I thought everybody cared about it. And as I moved through and realized there's this whole marketing mix, right? And there's pricing and there's distribution and there's placement and there's seasonality and there's new, groups of people that we have to go after. So moving through my career, particularly from a marketing perspective, was appreciating all the different factors that go into connecting with that consumer and getting them to purchase, to love, and to become, advocates for the brand. And it's not just running that one print ad.
You launched Carnival Cruise Lines into the Australasian market. Tell me a bit about that journey. How did that come about? And what were some of the highs and maybe what were some of the lows?
Oh my gosh. So I was at Carnival Cruise Line at the time. I was actually the head of advertising. So I was the 2IC in the marketing department. And I was bored. And really because typical story, I had gotten pregnant and had twins and they were born early. So I'd taken a role that was, kind of the on-ramp back into the professional world. And then after a couple of years, I'd kind of fixed everything I wanted to fix. And so I'd gone into my boss's office and he was the CMO. And I just said, what's eating your lunch? Like, what projects do you have on your plate that just aren't interesting you? And I'll take them. And so he said, well, got this international project and I really am not that interested. And I'm like, bring it on, hand it over, I got this. And we were looking at a number of different markets to expand into, because at that time, Carnival was just in the US. And so I remember talking to the CEO and he's like, just go down to Australia, check it out, tell me what you think. So we landed here. I remember I landed here, it was September of, I guess it would be 15 years ago. It was September of 2010. And honestly, I just fell madly in love. Like within 24 hours, I called my husband and I was like, so we're moving here. Like, I don't care what Carnival wants to do, but we are moving here. I love it here. And then my next phone call was to the CEO and was very honest. I was like, we should have been here 10 years ago, because Carnival is really a brand and an experience for people who are social, love to try something new and love to have a go, and quite frankly are value orientated. And that's a pretty good description of most of Australia. And a month later, he was like, so yeah, we're going to do it. Do you want to go run it? So I went home to my husband. I was like, so we've got 5-year-old kids, 5-year-old twins. How do you feel about moving halfway around the world? And he's like, well, I'm a surfer and a triathlete who loves beer. So yeah, let's go. So a couple months later, we moved to Australia. That's where things got interesting, because what I will say, and I think this is kind of one of the interesting differences between females and males that I find absolutely fascinating, right? Because most men will apply for a job where they know 50% of the requirements and women will wait until they know 90. I knew 30. I literally knew 30% of the requirements for this job. And there were all these parts of the role that I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I cried from Sydney to LA, like 14 straight hours. I was like, what have I gotten myself into? And I'm moving my family halfway around the world. Like, I was so terrified. So I called my mentor, who's also my dad. And I called him up and like tears are flowing down my face. I was an absolute mess. And he was like, so I know you, Jennifer, and I know you have a list of the things you know how to do and a list of the things you don't know how to do. And I was like, yes. And the list of things I don't know how to do is longer. And he's like, okay, I want you to cross out the title of that second list, and I want you to retitle that list Things I'm going to Learn. And it absolutely floored me because I was like, oh, and just completely reframed this as here's an opportunity to grow and here's an opportunity to develop. And let me think, I know somebody, I know one of the first companies on the planet to really develop a revenue management system outside of the airlines was Carnival. And I knew the head of revenue management. And so I just put a meeting in her diary every 2 weeks. And then I went and found my finance partner and I said, okay, every month when the P&L comes out, you and I are sitting down. We're going to choose a line every month and you're going to help me understand, the drivers and the impacts and what's working and what's not. And within a year, I really had a very good understanding of what I was doing because I built a team. But more importantly, they felt part of the success of Carnival in Australia, because they were intimately involved in developing the business. And so it created a really positive relationship going forward for me in terms of learning everything, but it also created a better outcome for the company because everybody felt invested in the future of Carnival Cruise Line in Australia.
You stayed with Carnival Cruise Lines over the COVID period, and I feel like we can't talk about cruise liners without asking you, in a few words, how was navigating COVID for you?
Oh, my Lord. My Lord, oh, my Lord. So what I'll say is the 2 months, probably 6 weeks, I'd say, leading up to March 14th were so hard just because everything was changing every day. Like I would wake up every morning and every destination that we were going to had changed who could and who couldn't land on shore. So, on Tuesday it was nobody had been to Korea in the last 10 days. So then anybody who had boarded the ship, we had to disembark anybody who'd been to Korea in the last 10 days. And then it was Japan, Mexico, like the lists just got longer and longer and longer, but they were different for different destinations, and it was exhausting. And there was a part of me that, when we made the call, and it was the 14th of March, when we made the call to shut the business down, although it was an incredibly hard decision to make, I also knew it was the right decision to make because where we were was just untenable. And the risk was just unacceptable. But I'm not going to lie, there were a couple of days where I just curled up in a ball on the floor of my kitchen and cried. And I think it was actually like we all experienced COVID, right? I think the cruise industry probably experienced it a little more harshly than anywhere else, just by the very nature of what we were and whether you're in hospitality or which really cruising is partly in hospitality. It was going from 100 miles an hour to a complete stop. But the complete stop for me, to be honest, was important because it gave me a chance to reflect on the fact that I had tied my entire identity so tightly into Carnival Cruise Line and in Australia. And Carnival Cruise Line in Australia had stopped, but I still existed. And I was like, okay, just from a professional development perspective, it was time for me to separate my sense of identity from my professional identity. And it was actually a very healthy thing for me to have to do. But I never, ever want to have to lead a team through that. And I will say that, a week before we shut down, I was at a conference. I was at the NAFR conference, and Scotty Morrison had stood up on stage and said, "We are not going to let this virus shut us down." And I had said, I've been through SARS, I've been through, pig flu, I've been through 9/11. Like, this is nothing. We can handle this. And boy, were we wrong.
You mentioned before that your career to date has been essentially a whole lot of hustle and a whole lot of learning on the fly and believing that you can and figuring it out. How do you reflect on leaders within the business now that are coming up through the ranks? And when do you decide when to bring in somebody that is a known quantity or has had the direct experience externally versus developing people internally? And how much emphasis do you put on hustle as an attribute?
So it's interesting stepping into this business in particular for a few reasons. One, the hustle culture here was so extraordinary that when I walked in the door, there were a number of people who had over 4 months of holiday that they hadn't taken. because there was a culture that was so hard driving that going on holiday was unacceptable. So hustle, I absolutely believe in hustle, but I think there needs to be a balance because you can end up very burnt out, which is what I walked into when I first walked into the business here. To answer your question about building homegrown talent versus external, in this role in particular, but I'll go back to Carnival, when you are looking for a skill set, like, for example, running a website, whatever category you're in, I don't really think it matters. If you're really good at digital marketing or you're really good at branding or you're really good at building a website, we can teach you the business. And I think it's really important to bring people from outside the category to bring new ideas and new perspective, because we could start navel gazing, right? And we can say, well, we have the best booking engine in the cruise industry. And you go, well, that's great, but have you looked at Airbnb? Or have you looked at Amazon, who have made it so you can book something in 3 clicks? It's really complicated to go onto this website and book a cruise, and people get overwhelmed because they don't know what category they were supposed to be booking, and they don't know what a stateroom is versus a cabin, or they don't understand that an outside room doesn't mean that it is outside the ship, which somebody actually thought once. So I highly value bringing fresh perspective into a business, and I think it helps to raise the bar for the people who are in the business. That said, particularly in the industry that I'm in now, there's no company on the planet that knows more about surf parks than URBNSURF, because we just celebrated 10 million waves. Wow. in Melbourne, and more people have come through URBNSURF than any surf park on the planet. So it's so funny to think, yes, we've been in operation for 5 years, and wow, look at us, we're the veterans of the industry. So I deeply value the team members here at URBNSURF who have been on the journey for the last 5 to 5.5 years, the way that they have found solutions to problems that nobody had ever faced before. We had to build the maintenance program for the wave machine from scratch because there wasn't one that existed. We had to build a booking engine. There was, I couldn't go out in the market and say, hey, have you built a wave park booking engine? Because there isn't one. It doesn't exist. So it's really fun for us as a team to be, we're writing the playbook. We're writing the playbook on how to maintain a wave machine. We're writing the playbook on how to commercialize a wave park. We're writing the playbook on what a membership program could look like. Because there's no blueprint for this. And it just makes it really fun to go to work every day.
Yeah, you definitely have a pioneering spirit. Even though you had the global master brand of Carnival Cruises, you're still pioneering it in the local market and building relevance for customers here. And then you're doing the same now without the global brand to lean on. So obviously your love for experiential tourism and sort of values-based living has all culminated in URBNSURF. You're pioneering a whole new brand and relevance surf park here in Australia. What do you think in your role as CEO, how does your marketing background set you apart? Why do you think you were sort of selected and successful in this role?
That's a really good question. And I remember when I read the job description, it was very heavy on the commercial part. And I was really surprised because most, in Australia in particular, generally because there's such a focus on governance in this market, most CEOs come from either the CFO or the COO track. So less than 5% of CEOs in Australia came from the marketing track. However, in this particular instance, the product, they had already built the 2 parks, and I came on board right as they were finishing building Sydney, and the parks were operating well. What they really needed was to figure out how to build the surf market. So they needed somebody who had a deep experience both in building demand because really when I walked into Carnival, it was about building demand for cruising. And I'll just digress for a quick second. When I did some interviews with the media when I first arrived, and at that point, I think there were 450,000 cruisers a year in Australia. And the journalists were like, do you really think there's still more room to grow in the Australian market? And I was like, yeah, I absolutely do. What hadn't happened is nobody had really hit the family market at all. And people just assumed that cruising was for bogans and blue hairs. and not for families. And we went really hard after families, and we actually grew the entire family market for cruises by 25%.
Wow.
And within 8 years, we were the most highly penetrated cruise market in the world. And we actually hit 1 million cruisers in Australia within, I think, 6 or 7 years after Carnival arrived. So the opportunity to come in and reintroduce cruising, sorry, URBNSURF, I apologize, reintroduce surfing or introduce surfing, because the reality is in Australia, there's 5 million people that want to surf every year, but there's only 800,000 who actually do, right? So there is a huge untapped potential for surfing. And there's a million reasons why people don't make it out into the surf, right? Whether they're intimidated by the big waves, they're worried about the sharks, or they're just worried about the other people that are going to be there, or it's just the process of driving to the beach, finding a place to park, going and renting a board just seems all too much. Whereas with URBNSURF, you can just turn up with your Kazi, right? We have a wetsuit that you can borrow. We have a surfboard that you can borrow. We have amazing coaches. And within a month, we're going to have you like out at standing up on open face waves if you give us the chance. So
That's awesome.
in my world, we are solving the surfing gap. And we're allowing people to experience this sport, and we're allowing people from different backgrounds of different genders to come and feel warm and welcome and included out in the waves.
Reflecting on your early days when you joined URBNSURF, what assumptions, if any, did you have about whether it's audience or product or market fit or brand, and how have these evolved over time? Have any of them shaped your current strategy?
That's a great question. So when I came on board, I made an assumption that we didn't have to continue to focus on the core surfer. And in full disclosure, I live with 2 of them, both of whom are now working at URBNSURF. So yes, nepotism lives. They work as surf guides on the weekends, so it's okay, and they love it. But I just thought that we didn't even have to bother to market and to continue to communicate to the core surfer, because they understood the product and they would come no matter what. And I was wrong. We still need to continue to provide engaging content and to continue to stay relevant for the core surfer. So a lot of what we're talking about now is how do we broaden and make the product and the experience attractive for this new group of new to surf guests, but also stay authentic and true to the core surfer. Because the reality is the core surfers are part of this extraordinary culture that lives, eats, and breathes for the surf experience. And we as a brand are all about being true and honoring that, while also expanding it and making surfing warm and welcoming for a new group of people. So that's the space that we're trying to inhabit and trying to figure out how to make sure that we still represent the desired positioning for both those core markets.
Would it be true to say that you could market directly to the core or pro surfers and everyone else is a halo and sort of wants to, has the desire to be like them? Or is it too disconnected, a learn to surf surfer disconnected from a pro level?
So the absolute reality is, and this happened when they first launched the brand, it was very focused on the core surfer. And if you've ever seen core surfer surfing, for somebody who has never surfed before, you look at that and you go, I could never do that. It is so far from being able to paddle out and catch a little wave in a small break that it felt intimidating. And also when we first launched, we were about 80% male. So if you went onto the Instagram, it felt very male. And by the way, there were no hair dryers or hair straighteners in the bathroom. So this was not okay for those of us who have long hair. So one of the things that we really needed to do was open up the brand and start talking relevantly to people who were not great at surfing, because core surfers are consuming surfing content, right? They are so easy to find because you will find them. And like anybody who has an obsessive passion, core surfers can watch surf content all day long. So we can easily reach them. It's a very efficient way to reach them. The ROAS for our core surfers in Sydney is off the charts just because they're already consuming surf content so we can find them. Whereas going out and attracting people to try surfing for the first time, you're doing one of the hardest things that we ever do as marketers, which is getting somebody to change a habit or getting to somebody to try something new for the first time. And even if somebody says, yes, I've always wanted to learn to surf, there's a huge gap between I want to go and just, stand up on a board and see if I can do it versus, doing a 360 out in the advanced turn section of urban surf mobbing. They're two completely different things.
How's Urban Surf going as a business? And I'm interested in whether you answer this question any differently now as a CEO than you may have answered this prior in a purely marketing capacity.
So I would say two things. In a purely marketing capacity, I might have told you about our top of mind awareness. Whereas as a CEO, it is very much about how the business is performing, right? That's the important thing. And we are on track to hit our EBITDA target for 2025. Actually, we're on track to surpass it because April was a very good month and March was a very good month. So in the end, when I think about success, I think about four things. I think about our commercial success, which is how are the financials doing? I think about customers and whether we are building brand advocates, thinking about what our NPS is and whether I'm seeing big smiles around the park. I think about our crew and our ENPS score and whether they are engaged and whether they are smiling when they're out there in the park. And the last thing is safety. I mean, nothing in this business is more important than the safety of our guests and our crew. And that is a huge focus for us. So as long as we're ticking all four of those boxes in a balanced way, then I'm happy as a CEO.
Do you think taking sort of a reflective role back to these senior marketing roles that you've held before, reporting into a C-suite role, do you think you would have reported or told the story of marketing any differently knowing what you know now?
Yes. And I think, unfortunately, but I was certainly guilty of this, we marketers, particularly junior marketers, are often perceived as being the coloring in department. And if you want to engage senior leaders, particularly the finance team and the operations team, you need to talk about the financial metrics that matter. So instead of talking about reach, talk about your marketing return on investment and know your numbers. And the one thing that I've learned going from being a junior marketer to being in senior leadership is numbers and metrics are everything because they are what the board pays attention to.
How do you reconcile brand marketing and investment in brand with hard numbers? Obviously, there's brand tracking software and ways to measure these days that's a lot more accessible. How do you view brand marketing?
So first of all, I'd love to say I've cracked the nut on this one, but I could. It's still one of the hardest things, right? Because you want to look at both brand awareness, you want to look at brand consideration, and the conversations that I frequently have with the board are around the role of building a strong and resilient brand for two reasons. One, if you have never heard of the brand, then you're not going to consider it. And if you've never considered the brand, then you're not going to visit the website. And if you haven't visited the website, you're not going to book. And the role of branding is in that awareness and consideration phase. So it's absolutely critical to get people to move down into actually making a booking. And the second reason that branding is important is, and this goes back to my cruising days, it's what we call the pillow of goodness, right? There are going to be crises. Things are going to happen. Things that are going to damage your reputation. If you have built a strong and resilient brand that people have heard of and have positive associations with, you'll bounce back a lot stronger from a crisis than if you are only known by the people who are your customers. So I think both of those are really important, and those are things that I take into account when talking to the board.
Incredible. That's, really insightful. You've sort of bitten off quite a lot by being a minority in both the sense of a woman in surf culture and a woman in executive leadership, and you've managed to marry both of those together. Have you felt any resistance at all in either case? And if so, how do you handle that?
It's funny, I was reflecting on this the other day, 'cause one of my observations is there's no male version of me. I don't have a male twin who's gone on the same journey with me. So I can't say what role my gender has had to play. I can say, in full honesty, do I feel like I used to get cut off more than other people, or do I feel like I got recognized as much as I could have for my work? Possibly not. In the end, I am exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do. So I feel incredibly fortunate in that way. I think not being a core surfer and working in this industry, the surfing community in Australia, I mean, the CEO of Surfing Australia is male, the CEO of Surfing New South Wales is male. 70% of surfers are male. So I'm certainly an outlier. But interestingly, the other oldest surf park in the world, which is the Wave over in Bristol, also has a female CEO who's not a core surfer. We're both progressive surfers. So what it does give me as a perspective, it also means that I have to have core surfers on my team. And I have been very clear with the core surfers on my team. And I've said, your job is to make sure we don't do anything that damages the connection and relationship that we have with the core surfers and the authenticity that we've built with that cohort, because they are a core part of our success.
Yeah, that's incredible. Surrounding yourself with people to fill in, I guess, fill in the gaps so that you've got a whole team making decisions.
Exactly.
So operating in a relatively new industry, or very new industry, without a clear roadmap or blueprint, it's both exciting and daunting. I'm going to ask you a provocative question, and one that I think about quite often. Do you think that risk is perceived or rewarded differently when it's taken by a woman in leadership?
Oh, wow. I have no idea. So what I will say is my job as a CEO is to come to the board and say, this is where I think we should go. It is based on, my 20 years of experience building new categories and new businesses. Here are the risks, and here's the potential benefits. Shall we do this? And I absolutely adore the board that I have. They're so supportive. They push me. They push me hard, and they don't let me get away with anything. But they are incredibly supportive as long as we are very clear on why we think a risk is worth taking. Because I've always said, go big or go home, right? You're not going to build something from scratch. You're not going to open new markets. You're not going to get other people to try new things if you're not willing to try new things yourself.
Yeah, and how incredibly inspiring for the team that work around you, that you're here, you mean business and you're here to get things done. And I think that would definitely be a rally cry.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about your relationship with marketing as it stands now at URBNSURF, how do you interrelate both as an executive but with the background of, senior marketing roles? When do you know when to speak up versus when to let others drive?
I have got some incredibly smart people working for me, and I also have some people who are deeply knowledgeable about the surf industry and about the different cohorts within the core surfer, and I really, really trust them. That said, we meet every single week, and my job is to help make sure they know exactly what direction we need to be going in, and then provide them with the support they need to get there. And sometimes that support is, okay, here's how we handled something similar at a prior role that I was in. Or sometimes it's, here's what the board is expecting us to do. And sometimes it's just backing them when they have the right idea already.
Sounds like it goes both ways, that you're there both to teach and inspire, but also to sort of stand in and take up the good fight at a board level.
Yep. And sometimes I have to say, no, we're not going to do that. Which is generally when people want to do a promotion and it's going to mean that we're going to make, we're going to cut prices by 20%. They generally know they're going to get a no from me.
On a prior episode of the podcast, I had Tony Westlake from Big Red Group, and she was also talking about her passion for experiences and non-tangible items. We were just talking about how hard it is to sell an experience when you've not experienced it yourself, to a prospective customer. Obviously, you've had that both from a cruising perspective and now from at URBNSURF. What have you found are effective ways to sell an experience?
So this goes back a long way to I remember doing a project on this back when I was at university, but I'll use Carnival as a good example, right? The guests who love a Carnival Cruise Line experience would talk about the dancing waiters, right? And they would say, "Oh, you have to put the dancing waiters in your ads because they're the best part of the experience." And we'd get our NPS surveys back, and everybody's talking about the dancing waiters. But what makes somebody come back a second time is not what makes somebody come back the first time. And the reality is, for example, with cruising, it was very much, where are the destinations? Because the most important thing to somebody who's going on a cruise for the first time is what destinations they are. And so similar to my earlier answer when it comes to urban surf, I can't go out and get people to try surfing for the first time by showing pictures of, the Irukandjis doing amazing things on the airwave, because they're going to go, "Oh, that's fabulous, but that's not me, and that's so far from my reality that I'm intimidated." So what we found, and it was definitely a test and learn, but we knew that people just, they wanted to see themselves standing up on a board. They wanted to have that experience. And using visuals that, if it was a female, this is not rocket science, but if we run an ad, we actually found that the drivers we call them future frothers, by the way, people who haven't surfed yet. So we had to create two completely different segments for future frothers. We have a female future frother and a male future frother, because the drivers for learning how to surf and the things that they respond to are very different. So male future frothers are like, "I want to progress, and I want to progress now." Whereas for female future frothers, "I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel warmly welcomed. I want somebody who's just really going to hold my hand and walk me through this." So we had to do very different creative, and you have to really dig in and understand those target markets and understand their drivers in order to get them to convert to trying something for the first time.
Fascinating, and great that you've mapped those customer journeys or, audience personas that you can then, I guess, match creative and messaging to, because you're right, you've got people at different stages with different needs and probably different risk appetites for how quickly they want to progress.
Oh yeah, well, I have to say one of my happiest days when I was able to present to the board ROAS by segment, by step of the funnel. I was like, "We're going to stop having this conversation." I'm like, "Here it is. Here's why we do a segmentation study, and here's why it matters." And they were like, "Oh, okay, I get it."
All right, final question from me. What do you want your legacy to be? Not just as CEO, but as a woman who's pioneered, multiple launches into different regions and now working on a really unique surf product. What's ahead for you? What's possible?
Oh, wow. So I guess my two things I really want. My first thing is I would love to help create a world where everybody, and women in particular, felt comfortable asking questions, right? Because the very best way to learn is to just ask, reach out and ask questions so that you can truly understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And my second one, and this is a big bugbear of mine, is mentoring, right? Because there's a lot of research that has shown women in business get a lot of feedback on their, I'm doing air quotes even though it's a podcast, so bear with me, on their executive presence, air quote, which, oh, wow, did I get a lot of feedback on my executive presence. And I was told repeatedly that I was, I had too much energy. I had too much passion. I needed to tone it down. I needed to just sit back and not, I actually had somebody say, "You're aggressive."
Wow.
It's unattractive in a woman.
Wow.
Which I was like, "Excuse me?" And whereas men generally, when they get mentored, they have people walk them through the P&L and walk them through the biggest challenges for the business and the biggest opportunities. So I would love to create a world where being a big, bold, passionate female was an acceptable way to show up in the world, and didn't make people feel uncomfortable, which it apparently did. And also a world where men and women get mentored the same, which is, let me walk you through the profit and loss statement. Let me walk you through the key drivers that are going to, make this business grow over the next 5 or 10 years, which that's the stuff that we all really need to understand. And I think particularly for people who come from a marketing background where we really only live in one part of the P&L, right? So we're that big spend line, well, spend line or investment line, depending on how you look at it, which makes everybody nervous. And then we're just in charge of driving the top line, which means you're really missing so much of the meat of the P&L in terms of cost of goods sold, for example, or looking at, casual, in our world, it's casual labor, repairs and maintenance, and the staff costs. So I would love to live in a world where people felt comfortable calling up somebody in the finance department, anybody, and just going, can we sit down and walk through the P&L? Can you help me understand how this works and what role I can play in making our results better every year?
Almost unboxing the role of a marketer into broader thinking and sort of understanding the bigger picture and how to talk business as a marketer.
Definitely how to talk business, because if you start talking business, you instantly get more respect.
What an ending. What a great answer to end on. That was incredible. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. My biggest takeaway from my interview with Jennifer was, apart from the fact that less than 5% of CMOs make it to the CEO seat, is that she just brings her whole self to work, which I think is fantastic. She is bold and vivacious, and she has a strategy, and I love her retrospective thinking on how she now interrelates with marketing and brings marketing and brand metrics and measurement to the boardroom table.